But then there's also this idea that somehow the love wins, right?
Yeah. And that tension in the self, though, in the ego self or in the personal self, the not true self, is the fear that love doesn't win.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which is, in mental terms, lacking faith.
So I think that's one way to describe the tension of that transition that you went through in moving from conscious mind to self to unconscious.
Right. Yeah, I feel free to do that because I'm so certain that that's not going to take over. I have clients that are face to face with that darkness, with that hatred, and they conceptually they believe love is going to win.
Right.
But it's easier said than done, and I don't know why. I can't remember if I.
But just real quick,
Yeah.
as far as that embodiment you're talking about of consciousness in self or through self, is it about the lacking less, having more faith? Embodying begins to shift that balance even in personal self.
Yeah, and then it's that thing where it's no longer faith for me. There's just a knowing. Like it happened.
But would you say are there aspects of self that still don't, just like trying to frame, I know for me, like there's, I don't feel that all the time, and I don't feel that in every context, and I don't feel that overall I feel it, but there are like times when I don't, right?
Feel that sense of what we're calling faith.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that tension in personal self being, and I sound like an evangelical Christian, a lack of faith as we're kind of framing it, a relationship between conscious self and unconscious. Are you a paragon or are you a villain?
Tell me if I'm speaking of what you're talking about. The thing that's in between, like what we're calling Lance, right, or what we call Jeff, or the ego mind. If you orient as that, you're not going to have faith.
That is getting at what I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's this weird thing where it's like, the Christ story just makes a lot of sense to me because it's how I experience it, and it's how I see other people experience it. It's like the ego's on the cross, and just like with the Jesus story, you get far enough along that process, and you find yourself on the cross, and then you hit the "Why have you forsaken me?" moment, right? Where even Jesus hit that point where there was a loss of faith.
Yeah.
And indeed, a death. And to whatever degree I went through that, it was it happened as far as my intellectual awareness of it. It's like it just happened to me.
Yeah.
It sure as hell wasn't deciding to try to do it. I was just deeply involved in my personal life. But something cracked, and that hatred that you were seeing erupted like a volcano in my psyche. And it was a vibratory frequency I'd never encountered before. I had no idea. I thought I could get angry. I thought I could run anger. But it was like this was just several octaves, lower or whatever, or more intense or than I'd encountered in my mind before. And it overtook me. And it was just this odd experience. Like it was like I was just being taken by the devil. And I can't remember if I told this story on the podcast, but I don't know. Should I tell it now? A 5 minute.
Yeah, I think we should. If my knee wouldn't hit the desk, I'd be at the edge of my seat.
There was this experience that happened when I was going through a divorce, and I had just gotten dropped off at my office to go do sessions, and a thing had just happened. I won't go into details about the thing, but I was face to face with the marriage is over, and my daughter's gonna she's gonna now grow up half with me and half not. And so it was just this like splitting of family that I was completely devoted to. So it was like the atom split, the thing that was what I was anchored in, cathected to, committed to, split like splitting an atom or something. And it was like I was walking down the hall to go to my office, and I was basically coming undone, having a psychotic break. And I remember there was a full length window down at the end of the hall, and I was only in the second story, but I had this overwhelming urge to just sprint full speed and run through that window and hopefully just shatter myself. And thankfully I resisted that urge, and I turned and I went into my office. And as soon as I walked in the door, I fell just flat down on my face. And then that energy just erupted up into my head. And again, it just felt like something I'd never experienced before. Like a volcano erupting and lava suddenly filling my mind, and just dark, angry hatred and awfulness. And I was just overcome with, within, I don't know, 5 seconds, like I went unconscious. And I don't know how long I was laying there, I for a few minutes, I think. And then I kind of came to again and rolled over. And then none of this was premeditated. I just sort of found myself doing it. I was just sort of dazed in an extremely blank state, a blankness I'd never known. And then something shifted, and I just just still laying on my back, reached my arms up towards, and I get emotional every time I talk about it, towards God. And I just started saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And it felt like I was failing as a human. And, like most people tend to say, it was like the worst any human had ever failed. No one had ever quite failed to that extent that I was failing.
Yeah.
But I was just admitting it, like I can't do it. I cannot. And I'm not even sure do what, survive this, stay good, I don't know.
Exist.
Yeah, exist. And so I bawled and said, I can't do it. I don't know how many times. And then finally just kind of collapsed my arms down. And then this, for lack of a better word, energy just started pouring down into me. And immediately in my mind, it was just with certainty, I was aware this is grace. And it just poured down into me. And, I don't know for how long, and matter of minutes. And then just kind of like after a good cry session, I sort of pulled myself together and got up. And I was aware, like, okay, everything's different now. And then just a thing that's always in my mind about it was interesting. I talked to my mom on the phone that night, who had been just super worried about me because she could just hear a thing in my voice in the days leading up to this that, like, he's not okay. And I talked to her that night. I didn't even mention this experience, and it felt like a kind of a usual conversation that wasn't very long, and we were going to get off the phone. And she said, I don't know what it is, but she said, I've been so terrified for your well-being. And she said, I can't explain it, but now I know you're going to be okay. And I knew exactly why she was saying that. And then it was one of those things where it's like, and now my life has been different since then. And it's not like I didn't go through terrible experiences since then, and trials and tribulations, but there was a dramatic shift, and there was a death that happened. And in relationships that I had prior to that, especially like I was living in Minnesota and I grew up in California. And so like the next time I went back to California, it was like people were trying to connect to that place that I had been orienting my selfhood from. And I could tell they like couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And it was an odd experience because there's a way that I felt even more conscious and even sort of
more like yourself,
more love for them and more connection and whatever.
Yeah.
But it was like there was this disconnect because we couldn't hook up in the same way, which was a kind of an odd experience. But yeah, so and then since then it's like, okay, what's that?
like a ghost.
Yeah. Yeah, and then since then that's one of the many experiences that have informed my work. It's like, okay, I have an understanding now how this works. And when I see a person struggling with that kind of energy starting to bubble up in their system, it's like, okay, I know how this works, and feel extremely confident in guiding them through that. Because it's not an idea or a hope I have in my mind that this is how, or a agenda or something. It's like, no, I feel that it's like, okay, I'm being, in the same way that whole experience sort of happened to me. It's like it starts happening in session where this thing takes over and is doing the session with the person that isn't Lance's ego. It's this.
And there's a felt sense to that inrush of grace.
Right. And there's a wisdom there about how this stuff works. So then when the client's got this or that going on, whether they're having a big dramatic death rebirth type of experience like that in the moment, or whether it's just some phase of it, or it's that strange thing where, I find myself explaining these esoteric concepts and truths. And at the same time, my intellect's like, oh, wow, that's fascinating. As if it's like listening to me talk also. It's like, oh, I always wondered how that worked,
And that's why it's both intrapsychic and relational.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Did you go back to work that day?
I actually had sessions, like 15 minutes later.
Work sucks sometimes. I feel like you should have gotten that day off.
Yeah, right. So yeah, there's been a bunch of those over the years that were life-changing shifts like that.
Was it because you've talked about Kundalini experiences you've had?
Yeah, that was later.
Yeah. As far as that lava feeling in your mind seemed similar in some ways.
No doubt. And I've wondered about that as far as, to what extent, I don't know, was that the initial opening of Kundalini and it just took a couple of years for sort of this next thing to happen or what? But yeah, definitely same energy. It just hit different parts of my psyche. And so it was experienced different, but it was the same. It was lava both times.
Right. It's like you created a channel.
Right.
Or it created a channel for itself and then kept moving.
See that's an important point that the experience I went through a couple years earlier set me up now so that when that Kundalini erupted at the base of my spine and it hit my head, I didn't get thrown into the it's like all this darkness started showing up, but I was already able to navigate it and hold it. So when the Kundalini happened, I suddenly started seeing demons in people, but I just like suddenly already knew what it was and wasn't, and had this knowing about it and had this ability to hold the light in the face of it. Whereas someone who hasn't gone through that process in the mind and Kundalini erupts, they're in much more of this struggle and fear of it.
It's like it's psychosis in the sense of being non-rational or irrational, but having a container for it and not acceptance of it or not.
Yeah, it's that thing that I think is so important, which is that I see people fighting to not have their ego be possessed by darkness. And I get why, and that's important to do, but the more you have a conscious realization, then what you notice is actually the ego is just possessed by darkness. And so, like when I did that thing with you for a sec, that, showed you that darkness and let it, show in my eyes and whatever, I was letting my ego be possessed by darkness. But I was conscious, so it wasn't a problem. It's like if you're feeling angry, but you're trying to not let it show in your facial expression. But you already know that, well, whether you let it show in your facial expression or not, you feel it. And letting it show in your facial expression doesn't mean you're suddenly overcome.
Doesn't change anything. Right.
And so, good actors, if someone's doing good acting, they're letting their ego mind be taken over by the sadness, by the whatever, right? Because if they're not, then it's just bad acting. But it's funny, people walk around literally, trying to have their ego mind be happy instead of sad, or be light instead of dark, or be this or that, instead of letting their ego mind, letting the energies that are coming from body up into the ego mind and have the ego mind experience them.
You can do a whole episode on that. Just allowing that for yourself.
Yeah.
That's a source of anxiety for sure. I mean, that ideation of like self-harm, like when you really mean it, is terrifying, And like the line between doing it and not doing it is very thin. So just to kind of emphasize, like acknowledge like what you're sharing in that.
Yeah, it's easy for it to sound like,
well, he didn't do it.
Yeah. And like, no, it was the person. It's hard to know how, like you're saying, how close a person is to actually doing it.
Yeah.
And or just how real it is to them. Right.
Glad you didn't do it.
Me too.
Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
It's a very different than the Kundalini story.
Yeah.
As far as the peril that you were in.
Yeah. And again, it's this weird thing where I don't know why. I don't know why I see some people spend years caught in a terrible struggle and why did I, what was it that enabled or allowed me to let go, if you use that word, and have that process happen? Like why didn't I just run and jump through that window? I don't know. Why didn't I just shut down and repress and get super, super depressed? And, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was not an unstable kid. I didn't have even mood swings, terribly, let alone, I mean? I had quite a stable ego identity. So that eruption, that whole thing happening was, I mean, it was very surprising to me. And it's not like, boy, I really had faith, or I was really able to like face that fear and go ahead and let myself die. It wasn't like that at all. It was just like it happened.
All or nothing.
Yeah, and I don't know why I turned over and started saying I can't do this. I don't know why I didn't just get pulled down into darkness. Like I don't have an understanding of that.
And it's like you're asking grace why.
Right.
You can ask as much as you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And that thing where grace comes down and it's not because I'm not aware of earning it, and my understanding is that thing where it's like, no, and I say this to clients often, because I think it's important. It's like the redemption, right? The forgiveness, all that. It's not because we deserve it. Like that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
You don't deserve it. I didn't deserve it. Whatever that means, I don't even know what the fuck that means, but that thing where we're all trying to earn it. We're trying to earn whatever.
Yeah.
And that whole, the Christian idea of like, give it up, confess that you're, I think I've said before on here that like I'd sit in church and, these lessons about like, confess that you're a sinner. And we'd recite these passages about saying that we're unclean and blah, blah, blah. And I remember it hit me the wrong way. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
This doesn't seem like, what did I do?
Right.
I don't know what you guys did that, has you so willing to stand here and say how, like, what dark sinners and awful people you are. But I was like, it just didn't quite resonate with me. But then that idea of, okay. Yeah, I don't know, just it's outside of what our ego intellects try to put on it as far as being good or bad or earning.
Grace is for other people.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that like no one else can live your life. Feels related, that like what's taboo for you, just kind of things we've talked about throughout this, that it is so personal. And it just reminds me, like Ram Dass would say, that like everything you need for enlightenment is present now. That like your lived experience is grist for the mill of growing up, of becoming conscious. You can't do it vicariously. And like all of these things that seem so almost contrived at this point, or trite or cliche, that it is, you will find the experience in your life that makes it true. That you'll find out when you need grace, because it'll be the only thing that's available. It's pretty amazing that we talk a lot about ideas on the podcast, and really it's ideas about experiences. And until you have some of those experiences, it's going to remain an idea, but it's there until it happens. And then people show up to work with you because they have an experience that they don't have an idea about,
Yeah.
I feel like this, it feels really good. I think it was a good talk. It's very wide ranging, but I think like really related. There's a lot of both personal and cultural narratives that we're talking about, and that all tie together. Yeah. Thanks again for sharing that story.
I don't know. I don't think we can do any more in-person podcasts.
Too real.
Too much. Two people gathered. It was too much.
I'm going to go back to California. If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.